Welcome back, everyone. So, since the last episode, Uncle Bob has had a premonition. He has to defeat 3 mafia gang bosses: a giant spider, a giant monkey, and a flying dragon. If he's to institute law and order as the new self-proclaimed sheriff of the island, things must change. However, to do so, Uncle Bob will need to recruit some powerful locals to become his subordinates. And the locals on this island can appear all the way up to level 150. So Uncle Bob has a lot of preparation to do before he can defeat these plus-sized degenerates. And so Uncle Bob sets off to gather in materials so he can make a negotiation chamber, a one-way negotiation chamber for the locals. And thanks to Barry Mecca, he's the richest man in the world. So now that the negotiation chamber is complete, Uncle Bob sets off to recruit some locals, and imagine his disappointment when he spots this level 8. So he sets off again, and this one's level 40, so Uncle Bob is kind of lacking in the friend department, so he decides to take what he can get. So he lassos this man and puts him to sleep. And back to the grind. But then Uncle Bob sets off again, looking for more locals to recruit to his team. And then he spots another Pteranodon. This one's just 16 levels higher than the previous one. But Uncle Bob is lacking options at the moment, so he puts it to sleep as well. And then he remembers that he needs keratin for this man's saddle, so he attempts to lure this turtle to the negotiation chamber, but yeah, that didn't work too well. So now Uncle Bob has a bounty on his head by the Ninja Turtles. And while trying to escape, Uncle Bob inadvertently lets this man on the raft, and so he has to abandon ship. However, the turtles are too busy taking it out on Uncle Bob's raft, so he gently reminds them that if you're not for the law, then you're against the law. And then he treats them like the bandits that they are. And when he's done handling these pesky seafood platters, he checks on his Pteranodon and names it Sonic. Then he harvests those turtles for their keratin and makes a saddle. However, Sonic does not have an impressive deadlift, so he puts him on a raft and he sets off. Uncle Bob has heard that there is a particular spot where the most important locals tend to gather, and that's the spot he has in mind. Upon arriving at the said spot, which is on the brink of the snow, right on the edge of the snow, he mounts Sonic and goes off to see what he can find. And right off the bat, he finds a bird, level 96. That'll have to do. So he heads back to the raft and places some dinosaur gateways in the form of a trap. And then he mounts Sonic and proceeds to attempt to get that man's attention. Then by invading his personal space, he gets his attention. And now that bird is really mad at Uncle Bob. However, Uncle Bob realizes that you can just put bait in a trap and snap it shut. And so he puts himself in the trap as bait, and the bird comes in. He's supposed to run in between the pillars, but for some reason he gets stuck, and yeah, he dies. And so when he respawns on his other raft, he has to make the entire trip back up north. But when he gets there, that man is still comfortably in the trap. doesn't seem to be in a hurry to move. And then Uncle Bob proceeds to put him to sleep because birds are better reasoned with when they're asleep. And then he puts his clothes back on. And when he tries to mount Sonic to get prime meat, turns out Sonic has not improved his deadlift at all. So Uncle Bob puts away all his stuff, and then now Sonic can freely fly. And then he tries to locate something that's made of prime meat, and instead he finds this Ankylo. This man can gather metal. So Uncle Bob needs to recruit him to his team. And he doesn't really need a negotiation chamber because this man is not the fastest. He just runs and shoots at him. And eventually this man falls. So Uncle Bob now has 2 volunteers that he has to feed. And while after watching this carno and doing a perfect drive-by and stealing the man's meat, the man isn't too happy and goes after Uncle Bob's bird. But the pteranodon is tougher than it. It's a Giga Chad. And now Uncle Bob offers the Colonel's prime meat to the bird, and the bird wakes up being named Fox 1. Yeah, don't sue me for that. And so Uncle Bob starts to gather berries to feed the other volunteer when he spots these aloes being a nuisance to society. And if he wants to set an example and institute law and order, he has to send them back to the lobby and continue his berry grinding mechanics. And now that he has all the berries to feed that Ankylo, it wakes up and he names it Ambrose. And then he realizes it's a female, so he has to change the name to Ambrosia. Yeah, Uncle Bob is not the greatest with names. And then he spends the rest of the evening berry gathering, and then this pack of hyenas decide to run into him. And yeah, hyenas are not really the best, so he makes short work of them. And so, heavily laden with berries, Berry Mecha returns to the raft. Now, Uncle Bob is the richest man in the world thanks to all those berries. And he plans to gather some fiber and move inland. However, sorry to say, but most of the footage from moving inland was corrupted. The screen recording just said failed, and there was nothing I could do to retrieve. But it was not a lot, it was just me flying, Uncle Bob just flying inland. But here, we landed on this spot next to the river and made a small base when we realized that the neighborhood was not the friendliest. There was a level 72 Spino and this useless Terry, level 16, but still. And then a raptor came to welcome me to the neighborhood. So Uncle Bob decided to return to the raft and come back better prepared. This is just him flying to the raft, grabbing an explorer note, and then farming while starving and freezing. Uncle Bob is a Giga Chad. And now that he's back at the raft, he claims his daily reward. Well, I don't know where that's from. And gathers up some more berries because this should be his last trip inland. And then he destroys all the structures he's placed down and also farms some more. Berry Mecha will not be going inland. He's too heavy for the bird to carry, and yeah, so we're using him to maximum efficiency, gathering all the berries we can and then picking up the Ankylo and headed inland. We have to stop on the volcano for stamina so the bird can rest, and then the Ankylo pulls some suicide maneuvers and tries to jump into the lava. But Uncle Bob is too quick for him. He swoops him up with the bird and carries him off. And then they stop on this outcropping of rock to pick up an explorer note and put this man to work. Yep, it's time to go metal farming. After all the metal is guarded, Uncle Bob picks the man up and takes him back to base. They arrive safely, and now Uncle Bob has to evict neighbors. On that is when that Terry is out of the area, he proceeds to place some gates because he wants to make it a gated community and not allow everyone in. But the locals are not too happy about this, and they attack Uncle Bob repeatedly. So Uncle Bob has to really complete those gates. But in the meantime, he places 2 refining forges and gets a drink, and yeah, that man is a nuisance. So he finally completes his gates and puts all the metal in the forges to smelt. That's when that man decides to attack Uncle Bob's base, and the bird wants to go fight it, but Uncle Bob has to quickly whistle it to not kill itself, and then take it to safety before he starts using it as an opportunity to trank that big fella. But the big fella gets dizzy and runs away, and despite Uncle Bob's best efforts, this man is what the hell is this man? He kites Uncle Bob like a true legend, avoiding every last arrow. And after 30 wasted minutes, Uncle Bob gives up the chase and returns to base. And then he proceeds to drive out some more unwanted neighbors, this time for their resources, but don't tell anyone that. And now Uncle Bob decides to make one final trip to the raft when he spots a level 50 Rex. Yeah, level 50 is not the best, but Uncle Bob is not the choosiest right now. It's a T-Rex. It's the biggest, baddest carnivore on the island. Well, that's what he thinks. But after shooting it a bit, it makes eye contact and comes after Uncle Bob, but then it gets dizzy from the tranks and starts to run away as well. Everyone's scared of Bob. Bob is a total legend. After a couple of minutes of chasing it and running out of trank arrows and having to go back to the raft to grab some more narcotics and trank arrows, Uncle Bob finally puts this big fella to sleep. Now he just needs the prime meat to tame it. So he goes after some more hyenas and scorpions. Just basically all the mean, bad nasties in the area. And then this Kentro decides to assault Uncle Bob, but because it's not a big, bad, nasty, Uncle Bob doesn't want to send it back to the lobby. And while gathering berries with Berry Mecca, he comes back and notices that suicidal Kentro still followed him to base and got killed by the birds. But then that's none of his business. The Rex is tamed and he names it Jane. As night draws and things get dark, Uncle Bob is the happiest man on the island. He has a Rex and 2 birds and a future dinosaur. Yeah, happiness is free. And so he checks on this drop on his way back to his base, and it contains nothing good. But yeah, Uncle Bob has successfully set up a base in this dinosaur infested island, and of course his story continues in the next episode.